Have you ever noticed how the moments when life seems to collapse are often the same moments that later shape your deepest strength? Imagine this. You lose a job you thought defined your worth, your bank account bleeds dry, and every plan you carefully built crumbles into dust. In that suffocating silence, when the world feels indifferent to your struggle, a thought inevitably rises. What now? Most people rush to patch the wound. They chase another job, another distraction, another fragile source of validation. But what if the real opportunity is not in fixing the broken piece, but in rethinking the entire game? This is where the voice of Niccolò Machiavelli whispers something unsettling, almost scandalous into our ears. The collapse of your plans is not your enemy. It is the raw material for power. Machiavelli, so often misunderstood as a cynic, was in truth a realist of the human condition. He understood that fortune is fickle, that she is like a storm, sometimes generous, sometimes merciless. And when the storm arrives, clinging to old structures only guarantees your ruin. But the one who dares to see ruin as the ground zero of reinvention, he or she is the one who can transform failure into strength, even into wealth. Think about it. When everything is gone, when you have nothing left to lose, you also have nothing left to protect. And that is when you are most free. Free to question illusions, free to abandon masks, free to rebuild not out of fear but out of clarity. Isn't it strange that what we fear most, the fall, is often the very key to liberation? This channel exists for those who feel that tension in their bones. You have tasted disappointment, perhaps even despair, and yet something inside you whispers that your story is not over. If that resonates with you, stay with me until the end of this video. We are going to uncover the hidden lesson of Machiavelli, a lesson that could shift how you see your failures, your ambitions, and even your relationship with wealth. And before we dive in, let me ask you, have you ever experienced a moment when losing everything became the start of something greater? Share your story in the comments. I want to hear how your ruins shaped your strength. And if this conversation speaks to you already, don't forget to like this video and subscribe, so we can keep walking this path together. What if the very collapse you dread is not the end, but the beginning of a different kind of wealth? Close your eyes for a moment and imagine. The business fails, the savings vanish, the reputation you built so carefully is shaken. Now, instead of spiraling into despair, picture yourself standing in that silence with a strange calm. Around you, ruins. Inside you, possibility. Machiavelli invites us into this uncomfortable yet powerful vision. He reminds us that fortune, unpredictable and uncontrollable, is like a river. When calm, we cross it easily. When it floods, it destroys villages, uproots trees, and sweeps away bridges. But the wise person, he says, does not curse the river. They learn how to build channels, how to direct its energy when it rages. So let us ask ourselves, what if failure is nothing more than fortune overflowing its banks? Painful, yes, but also a chance to redirect the current into new territory. Can you imagine this? Instead of seeing bankruptcy as humiliation, you begin to see it as liberation from illusions that were never sustainable. Instead of obsessing over what you lost, you begin to notice what you now have. Freedom from false obligations, courage to start anew, clarity about who you are without the decorations of success. And here is the paradox. People who have tasted ruin often develop a sharper vision than those who have only known comfort. They are not fooled so easily. They are forced to see life as it is, not as they wish it to be. And in that raw clarity lies a kind of wealth, one that no market crash, no betrayal, no failed plan can take away. So I ask you, what if you stopped thinking of wealth only as numbers in a bank account and started imagining it as resilience, adaptability, and the capacity to rebuild from ashes? What if true prosperity is not the absence of ruin, but the ability to rise again stronger each time? Hold that image in your mind, because as we move forward, we are going to dismantle some of the comforting lies you may have been told about success, and replace them with a truth that, though harder, is infinitely more empowering. We are told from childhood that success is a straight line. Study hard, get a good job, work your way up, and eventually you will reach stability. But reality has a cruel way of mocking this script. Layoffs come without warning, investments collapse, Relationships crack under pressure, and in those moments the illusion shatters. Success was never a straight line. It was always fragile scaffolding, ready to fall with the slightest tremor. Here lies the disruptive truth. The real danger is not failure itself, but the belief that failure should never happen. That belief makes us fragile. Machiavelli saw this with brutal clarity. He argued that rulers, and by extension all of us, must accept the volatility of life instead of pretending it can be eliminated. To build your life as though fortune will never strike is to guarantee your downfall the moment she does. Think about it. How many times have you or people you know clung to a sinking ship because they could not accept that the voyage was already over? How often do we throw good years after bad ones, pouring energy into an identity that has already collapsed? The illusion of control is what keeps us trapped. The collapse itself is neutral. It is we who interpret it as ruin or as raw material for transformation. This is the truth nobody tells you. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let the structure fall. Not patch it, not decorate it, not convince yourself it still stands, but allow it to crumble completely. Because only then can you see clearly what remains, what is indestructible, and what deserves to be rebuilt. Machiavelli called this courage virtue. Not morality in the modern sense, but the inner strength to face reality as it is, without comforting lies. He believed fortune favors not those who avoid risk, but those who dare to act decisively when everything is uncertain. So let me ask you directly, what illusions are you still holding on to, even as they crumble in your hands? What structures have you been afraid to let fall because of what others might think, or because you cannot imagine life without them? The sooner we confront this, the sooner failure becomes not a death sentence but a rebirth. To trust this path, we need to stand on the shoulders of someone who walked it with clear eyes. And few minds are as uncompromising as Niccolo Machiavelli. Dismissed by some as manipulative, even ruthless, he was in fact a man acquainted with loss. After years of political service, he himself was cast aside, imprisoned, even tortured. He knew what it meant to watch the walls of a life collapse. And yet, out of those ruins, he wrote The Prince, a book that would echo through centuries, shaping how we think about power, resilience, and the fragile dance with fortune. In that text, Machiavelli does not flatter us with promises. Instead, he speaks of fortune as a river that floods without warning, sweeping away the careless. But he also insists that human beings are not powerless. With preparation, with courage, with what he calls virtue, we can channel that river, turning chaos into opportunity. What does this mean for you? It means that bankruptcy, unemployment, rejection, these are not verdicts on your worth. They are fortune's floods. And like Machiavelli's Prince, you are called not to despair, but to build dikes and channels, to turn that wild current into new strength. Psychology today echoes this same truth. Researchers speak of post-traumatic growth, the idea that crises, while deeply painful, can become the very ground where resilience and wisdom grow. People often report that after devastating losses, they develop greater clarity about priorities, deeper relationships, and a renewed sense of purpose. Isn't this precisely what Machiavelli intuited centuries earlier? Think of the stories we admire. The entrepreneur who rose from bankruptcy to build a stronger company, the artist who created masterpieces after rejection, the individual who rebuilt life after betrayal. These are not fairy tales, they are demonstrations of the principle that collapse can serve as foundation, if we dare to see it that way. Machiavelli challenges us. Will we curse the river, or will we learn to direct its waters? Will we resist reality, or will we face it with the sober courage of virtue? So let me turn this back to you. Whose example inspires you when you think of someone who turned disaster into strength? A public figure, a friend, perhaps even a chapter in your own story? Hold that image, because it reminds us that what feels like ruin may in fact be the soil of a new kind of wealth. If we want to understand why we stumble, we must look beneath the surface. Failure rarely comes out of nowhere. There are hidden dynamics, subtle patterns we overlook until they break us. Machiavelli understood this well. It is not the visible enemy that destroys us, but the invisible weakness we ignored for too long. Consider this. How often do we build our sense of worth entirely on external structures, our salary, our status, our reputation, without realizing that all of these rest on foundations we do not fully control. We imagine stability, but in truth, we are standing on shifting sand. Then one day, fortune shifts and we realize too late that our identity was never rooted in something solid. This is why collapse feels so devastating. It is not just the loss of money or position, it is the exposure of the illusions we mistook for truth. The hidden pattern is dependency. Dependency on approval, dependency on fragile markets, dependency on the belief that life should unfold according to our plan. And when that dependency is shattered, it feels like death. Machiavelli warns against this vulnerability. He reminds us that fortune is never still, that security is never absolute. To live as if stability is permanent is to live asleep. Only the awake, the ones who anticipate change, who build flexibility into their character, can endure when the tide shifts. But here is the paradox. Most of us do not wake up until we are forced to. We resist reality until reality tears away our illusions. And yet that tearing is also a gift. It shows us the weaknesses we could not name, the fragile attachments we mistook for strength. Without collapse, we would never see them. So ask yourself, what invisible forces are shaping your life right now? Where have you placed your worth in something you do not fully control? It might be a career, a relationship, an image you show the world. To notice these dependencies is not to invite ruin. It is to prepare for it, to build a self that is less fragile, less deceived. When you start to see these patterns, failure becomes less of a punishment and more of a mirror. And only those who dare to look into that mirror without turning away discover the kind of wealth that cannot be taken from them. Sometimes the mind does not need more explanations. It needs a sentence that pierces like an arrow, something so sharp that it stays with you long after the conversation ends. Machiavelli himself mastered this art. He wrote with such clarity that his words still provoke centuries later. So let us distill his insight into truths you can carry with you. Here are some to remember. Failure is not your enemy. Clinging to illusions is. When you lose everything, you gain freedom to rebuild without masks. Fortune will strike. Pretending otherwise only makes you fragile. Collapse is not the end of wealth. Sometimes, it is the beginning of wisdom. You cannot control the river, but you can shape the channels it runs through. Each of these truths is simple, almost brutal, yet simplicity is what makes them powerful. They refuse to flatter you with comforting promises. Instead, they call you to a kind of courage that is deeper than motivation. It is the courage of facing life as it is. Think about how these sentences work. You might be in the middle of a setback, replaying your losses in your head when suddenly one of these lines surfaces. Failure is not your enemy. And something shifts. The event no longer feels like a verdict against you, but like an invitation to respond differently. That small mental shift is where resilience is born. Machiavelli believed that clarity, even when uncomfortable, is the beginning of strength. Modern psychology confirms this. The ability to name your reality truthfully, without denial, without exaggeration, is what allows you to act effectively within it. Words become anchors. They remind you of what is real when emotions try to drown you. So perhaps take one of these sentences and keep it close. Write it in a notebook, save it on your phone. Repeat it to yourself when fear rises. Because wisdom is not about knowing many things. It is about carrying a few truths so deeply that they change how you see the world. And maybe the next time ruin knocks on your door, you will remember. Collapse is not the enemy. It may be the unexpected beginning of your hidden wealth. Here is a strange truth. The very moment when you feel most powerless may be the moment when you are closest to real power. Collapse strips away illusions, leaving you bare, and in that nakedness something paradoxical emerges: strength. It sounds contradictory, doesn't it? Yet Machiavelli would insist this is where transformation begins. Think about it. When life is comfortable, we rarely question our routines. We cling to habits, to predictable roles, to the safety of appearances. But when fortune strikes, when bankruptcy, betrayal, or loss shakes us, the old armor falls apart. And with no armor left to hide behind, we meet reality directly. Painful, yes, but also clarifying. This is the paradox. Weakness reveals what false strength concealed. Suddenly you see which relationships were genuine and which were transactional. You see whether your ambition was driven by vision or by vanity. You see whether your identity was anchored in character or merely in circumstance. Collapse, then, is not only destruction, it is revelation. Machiavelli wrote that fortune tests the prince, not in times of abundance but in times of scarcity and danger. In good times, anyone can look competent. In crisis, only true virtue, the courage to act with clarity, remains. So what looks like weakness from the outside may in fact be the ground where authentic strength is born. Consider this. The philosopher Søren Kierkegaard once said that despair, if faced honestly, can become the doorway to faith. He too saw that what feels like the end can be the beginning of a deeper form of life. And this is where ancient wisdom and modern experience converge. Paradoxes are not contradictions to be solved, but tensions to be lived. So here is the question for you. Can you reframe your own collapse as a paradoxical gift? Can you look at your weakest hour and see that it stripped away illusions that otherwise would have chained you forever? What if, instead of resisting the paradox, you embraced it, seeing that your wound is also your teacher, your loss also your liberation? Strength does not always roar. Sometimes it is born quietly, in the silence after everything falls apart. And those who dare to live this paradox often discover a resilience that no comfort could ever have given them. We rarely think of collapse as a gift. Yet what if the promise of ruin is not humiliation, but transformation? Machiavelli would argue that those who dare to face fortune at her worst discover treasures invisible to the comfortable. The reward is not always immediate wealth, but a deeper kind of prosperity, one that makes material wealth possible again and meaningful when it comes. Imagine for a moment. The career is gone, the bank account is empty, the applause has faded. At first, the silence is unbearable, but slowly, something new emerges. You find yourself free from roles that no longer fit, free from expectations that crushed your spirit, free from masks you wore to impress. In losing everything, you recover the rarest wealth of all, clarity. And clarity is practical. With it, you stop wasting years chasing what was never yours to begin with. You no longer build fragile castles because you know how easily they fall. Instead, you begin to build differently, simpler, stronger, truer to who you are. This is why many people, after their greatest losses, later say, "It was the hardest season of my life, but I would not trade it because it gave me myself." Psychologists call this resilience capital, the inner wealth that grows when you endure hardship honestly. Unlike money, no one can steal it. Unlike status, no one can cancel it. And unlike luck, it does not come and go with fortune's tides. It is yours forged in the fire of collapse. Here is the promise. If you dare to see ruin as teacher rather than enemy, you gain a kind of wealth that makes every future risk less terrifying. You know you can rebuild because you already have. You know you can survive loss because you already did. And that unshakable confidence is worth more than any temporary success. So let me ask you, what if the reward you are seeking is already hidden in the very failure you fear? What if your ruins are not a graveyard, but a treasure chest, waiting for you to open it with the key of perspective? Those who dare to look will find that Machiavelli was right. Fortune may destroy, but she also creates. And in that tension, true wealth is born. Behind every story of collapse and renewal lies a structure, a hidden logic that connects suffering to growth. Without that framework, ruin feels random, meaningless. With it, even pain takes on purpose. Machiavelli gave us one such framework through the dance of fortuna and virtù. Fortune represents the unpredictable storms of life. Virtù is the courage, adaptability, and decisiveness that allow us to respond. When fortune strikes, virtù decides whether we drown or redirect the flood into something greater. But let us anchor this in psychology. Modern research on resilience echoes Machiavelli's insight. Psychologists describe 3 core responses that determine whether we are crushed or strengthened by failure: recognition of reality, acceptance of responsibility, and reorientation of purpose. First, You must see the truth without denial, naming what has collapsed. Second, you must own your agency, asking, "What can I do now?" rather than waiting for rescue. Third, you must reframe the event, not as meaningless loss but as part of a larger story still unfolding. History offers countless examples. Think of Abraham Lincoln, who suffered repeated business failures, political defeats, and even devastating personal loss before becoming one of the most transformative leaders in history. His life embodied the very rhythm Machiavelli described: fortune's blows, met with virtue's resilience. Or consider J.K. Rowling, who wrote her most famous work not from wealth or comfort, but from poverty and despair, using collapse as the soil for creation. The framework, then, is this: fortune is not optional, but how we meet her is. Collapse strips us down to essentials, and virtue is the act of rebuilding with clarity, courage, and responsibility. Over time, this cycle creates a different kind of wealth, not only financial recovery, but moral and psychological depth. The danger is that without this framework, we misinterpret suffering. We think it means we are cursed, unlucky, or worthless. But with the right lens, we see suffering as training, as raw material. Machiavelli would say, "Do not expect fortune to be gentle. Expect her to test you. And in that test, prove your virtue." So here is the question: how are you framing your current struggles? As meaningless punishment or as preparation for a deeper kind of strength? The framework you choose will decide whether ruin becomes prison or foundation. We have walked through collapse, through Machiavelli's harsh but liberating insights, and through the paradox that ruin can conceal the seed of wealth. Now it is time to bring this reflection home. Because transformation is never only about the individual, it is about how we show up for others once we have walked through fire. When you lose everything and rebuild, you do not only gain resilience for yourself, you gain compassion for others who are struggling. You recognize the silent battles behind polite smiles. You stop judging failure as weakness, because you know firsthand that collapse can be the crucible of character. In this sense, your wealth after ruin is not measured merely in money or status, but in the depth of your humanity. Machiavelli, often caricatured as cold, actually believed that strength was not about avoiding hardship, but about learning to govern oneself and others in the midst of it. To govern here does not only mean political power, it means guiding, influencing, supporting those around you with the wisdom you have earned. That is a form of wealth no market fluctuation can touch. And this is where we arrive at the final invitation. Reflect on your own ruins. Ask yourself, what did I learn when everything fell apart? How has my collapse reshaped the way I live, love, and lead? Share that wisdom, not only in silence with yourself, but here, with this community. Because by speaking your truth, you may give courage to someone still drowning in their own flood. So if you have found value in this journey, I ask you to do two things. First, leave a comment below sharing the lesson your ruins have taught you. Your story might be the lifeline another person desperately needs to hear. Second, if this conversation resonates with your path, like this video and subscribe to the channel. Not for vanity's sake, but so that together we can keep building a community where collapse is not the end of the story, but the beginning of transformation. Remember this: fortune will strike again and again. But with virtue, with courage and clarity, you can turn every fall into a foundation. Wealth is not the absence of ruin. Wealth is the strength, the wisdom, and the love you carry out of it. And that is the kind of wealth that lasts.